looking at the components of the peripheral nervous system, and we're also going to be looking at the components of the central nervous system. In lab, you always want to start with a file that says list of structures to know. This is going to tell you everything that you are responsible for knowing and the correct terminology that I want you to use. Sometimes things have different names for them. So you want to be sure and work from this list. I can't tell you the students that have come up with either just totally off-the-wall names or things that are not very commonly used, or labeled something and were completely off track because they didn't work from this list. Also, you do work in both APR and based on these PowerPoints and notes. Some things may show up in APR, but may not be good on a model. And so if you have this list, I expect you to be aware that you need to know and be able to identify that, either on the model or in APR or both. So it may not show up on a worksheet, but if it is on this list, you're responsible to make sure that you drill and practice that in your anatomy and physiology revealed. So in lecture, we look at the divisions of the nervous system, the central nervous system, and here we are beginning with the central nervous system. We are looking at the spinal cord. So over here on the left, you can see how it relates to the vertebrae. So we're looking at the brain here, and then the spinal cord as it goes down through to the cauda equina, which means horse's tail, and you can kind of see this looks like a horse's tail here at the end. These are all nerves here, all right? And so here on the right, you can see that they have laid this out in a straight fashion where you can see where the nerves are coming out. So the central nerves and then the peripheral nerve extending on the outside. So you can see really well the cauda equina here. This is probably the best picture of that. And then we have our spinal nerves coming out of the spine. So we have different regions of spinal nerves, and they obviously are going to be named accordingly. And so we'll start with the cervical nerves here. And so that's going to be the nerves that are coming through the cervical spine. And then the thoracic area, we will have the thoracic nerves. And in the lumbar area of our spine, we have our lumbar nerves. And then in here by the sacrum, we have our sacral nerves. I remember being a beginning anatomy and physiology student and looking at the diagrams like this and being really confused as to what I was looking at. So what I want you to do is stop and imagine that we have taken a spinal cord and we have taken a transverse section this way, and then we are looking down at the top. And so this is that slice. We're looking down at the top at the actual spinal cord. And so what you see here is we have the white matter here of the spinal cord, and then we have the gray matter of the spinal cord. Gray matter consists primarily of neuron cell bodies, soma cells, somatic body cells. White matter is mainly what we call myelinated axons. If it's myelinated, remember that speeds up the transmission, and then they extend out of the soma or the cell body. So these form connections between brain cells. So sensory neurons, we're going to learn, come in through the dorsal horn, all right? I remember dorsal by thinking about a shark or dolphin has a dorsal fin. And so the dorsal fin, or the dorsal horn, is going to be this one, okay? And so you have two dorsal horns. And remember, the dorsal horn contains the cell bodies of sensory neurons. So the senses are going to enter in through here. All right, so now we have the ventral horn. The ventral horn contains the cell bodies of motor neurons. So when that sensory neuron signal is sent in, it is dealt with either by an interneuron if it is a simple reflex, and then sent back out the motor pathway, or it is sent on to the brain to be dealt with, all right? And so dorsal at the top, dorsal fin, and then ventral at the bottom. And pay attention to the orientation, because this picture here could be turned over if you don't pay attention to the fact that these ventral horns, if you'll notice, they are thicker, okay? So the ventral horn here is wider, so that's how you know where the bottom is. Here we have a ganglion, which is a cluster or a gang of cells. And so we're looking at this portion over here on the left. This is the dorsal root ganglion. Since this is the dorsal side, that's the dorsal root ganglion or cluster of cells. And then they're going to narrow down to enter in through this dorsal horn. Ramus comes from the same word as ram's horn. So you can see this dorsal ramus here has the same shape almost as a ram's horn. So that's what we call that portion there, dorsal ramus. And on the ventral side, of course, then we would call that the ventral ramus. So we have the dorsal and ventral ramus. So we have three different types of meninges, right? We have dura mater, arachnoid mater, and pia mater, and that is the order that they go in from the outside layer. So dura mater is the outside layer to the inside, and so the way I remember that is DAP. So this blue portion here is the dura mater. So that is the dura mater portion of the meninges. Next, we have the arachnoid mater, which is the gray inside layer. It is the middle layer, and it gets its name because it somewhat has a spiderwebby appearance to it, which you don't see it so well necessarily in the models, but it has a spiderwebby appearance to it. So when you are taking your exam on this, you need to pay close attention to where this arrow is pointing. Is it pointing to the blue layer or the gray layer? So DAP, dura, arachnoid, pia. So we're going to have quite a bit of space now before we get to the pia mater. And so you can see here this roundish, creamy looking area here. That is going to be the pia mater, which is going to be the innermost layer of meninges, or meninges, if you want to say it differently, plural, singular. Epi usually means above, and so epidural space is the space between the dura mater and the vertebral wall. All right, space between the dura mater and the vertebral wall. So we could say it is above the dura mater. So you can imagine the dura mater is going to, remember, be this outside layer right here, and so this is the epidural space. Sub means below, so the subdural space is below the dura. So this is the space right below the blue, but before the gray. So I will have to identify this for you as a space on your lab exam. I will try to tell you space so you'll know what you're telling me. Are you telling me about meninges, or are you telling me about the space there? So lastly, we have the subarachnoid space.